And then I also often shoot 1 frame per second. I do a lot of time lapses with this camera. It has a built-in intervalometer, so I can shoot 1 photo every second, speed it up. I do that a lot, built in. And I'm shooting, I showed you earlier, I'm using a really thick ND filter. I use like a 10 stop 1000X ND filter, just because I want to get this level of motion blur with the cars moving. So I'm using, if I'm shooting 1 frame per second, I'm trying to follow the 180 degree rule, 180 degree shutter rule. So I'm shooting a half-second shutter speed. Problem is I go outside, it's super bright. I'm using lenses that do pretty well in low light, so I have to put a really heavy ND filter on to get that level of motion blur. So that's what I like about this camera. It's probably the reason I've been using this line of cameras for so many years, is just that it has everything that I need in one camera. I think in television news, I feel like the bar for quality was pretty low. So coming from a filmmaking world and going and covering the world of politics, just the fact that I had lenses that could get shallow depth of field, or the fact that I could shoot a time lapse in camera at the appropriate shutter speed, kind of blew away my bosses. And that's what I like, is that I can carry around one camera body and do 4K 60p. I can do 180 frames per second when I need to. I have image stabilization built in. They even added with this camera dual SD card slots. So I don't have to carry around a bunch of tools. This is the one tool that I need to do the job. So I'd love to know what I can share. What else can I talk about that you want to know? It could be about GH5, it could be about filmmaking, yeah. What was that?
How many lenses do you think you need to carry around?
How many lenses do I need to carry around? I don't need to carry around 6 lenses, but that's what I usually have. I have all the ones I showed you today, plus I've recently been carrying around the 25 millimeter, which is it looks like a simple lens, but it's an f1.4 lens, and it's just a beautiful portrait lens. I had a photographer friend borrow my camera, and she started shooting with this, and I realized, I should probably be using that for interviews and such. So I carry around 6 lenses, but I could probably get away with 3 or something. I think, like I said, you could shoot a whole film on the 12 to 35. I guess for a long time, all I really thought I needed was the 12 to 35 for just about everything. And then for those situations where you need some low light performance, I think the 42.5 would be pretty good. If those were the only 2 lenses I could carry around, I could probably get away with that. But I just kind of keep falling in love with new lenses. Like the 7 to 14 is fun for time lapses. The 12 millimeter prime is just a lot of fun. I really like that one. Being able to get shallow depth of field at 12 millimeters is really interesting. And then I have a whole other set of lenses I need to cover events. Like when I started shooting political events and I'm stuck in the back of the room, now I need the 35 to 100 and maybe even the 100 to 300. There's also a new 100 to 400 from Panasonic. But it just depends on your shooting style. I like to shoot wide, and so I could probably get away with just carrying around wide lenses. What other questions do you have? Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I kind of forgot that the GH4 is as old as it is. It's been around for 3 years. And to me, I didn't feel like I needed a new camera. The GH4 is still great. I guess the things I like that it's still the same battery. I mean, it's been the same battery since the GH3, and they work really well. They last on this camera about 2.5 to 3 hours. So usually I need 2 batteries for a full day of shooting per camera body. I like that the camera works the same. It's the same menu system and everything, so they moved like a couple buttons, but for the most part, it feels like the same camera to me. I rely so heavily on the intervalometer, so the fact that was on the GH4 as well. Most of the features I used were already on the GH4. What they really added with this is the in-body image stabilization, the 4K 60p, and the dual SD card slots. Which, dual SD card slots, I thought, I don't need that. That's for photographers or something. People want to put JPEGs on one and RAW on the other. Turns out, for me, it's actually been pretty useful for like shooting interviews. It can run onto card number 2 and it runs out of space. Also, you can hot swap a card while you're recording an interview. So if you've run from card 1 onto card 2, you You could pop out card 1, pop in a new one, and you could just keep rolling an interview for hours because the camera doesn't have any recording limit. And I also like the dual SD card slots because I shoot so many time lapses, I can send JPEGs to one card and video files to the other, and it just helps me when I'm offloading. New recording modes? Besides the, the GH4 could do 96 frames per second. This one could do 180, but it's the same system, the variable frame rate system. This one has, I think, roughly the same bit rates. This one can do up to 150 megabits per second. Right, yeah, that's new. So the GH5 can shoot 10-bit 422 internal. So you notice some of my modes say 10-bit next to them. I can shoot 4K at 10-bit, 30 frames per second. Honestly, I don't need 10-bit 422. I love that they added it because so many filmmakers are asking for it. A lot of people are recording onto an external device, like an Atomos recorder or something, to get 10-bit. I'm not a colorist. I'm not shooting in Vlog. I think if you were shooting in Vlog on this camera, you should probably be shooting in 10-bit 422. But for me, 420 8-bit video looks fine for the kind of quick turnaround stuff I'm doing. But you have both options. Right now, the highest bit rate is 150 megabits per second, but Panasonic is coming out with a firmware upgrade soon. I think probably the same one that will have the high resolution anamorphic mode will also add 400 megabits per second recording. Which again, I don't think I need that, but if you want high bitrate recording, it's there. I'm gonna have to get new SD cards if I want to shoot 400 megabits. 150 for the SD cards I have now is fine. They're good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if you need external power, in fact, I think maybe all the GH5s over there right now are plugged in to external power. They use the same adapter that's been around since the GH3. So I already had one. I think it's called like the BLC12 or something. I can't remember what it's called. But there's two parts. There's like a little piece that goes into the camera. It looks like a battery, but it's AC power. Yeah. And also for time lapses, the camera is smart enough to turn off between photos if your interval is really long, so it can conserve battery life for you. And there's a bunch of economy modes. Is the latitude? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the dynamic range is different with this sensor, but it does do better in low light. And the readout is twice as fast as the previous sensor, which means that rolling shutter is half as much. So, I mean, I never cared about rolling shutter because I don't move my camera like this all the time. But if you do, the rolling shutter, which used to be like this, is like this. You know, it's half as much. And because this processor is better, they were able to get rid of the crop factor of. It used to be when you're shooting 1080, you were shooting the whole sensor on the GH4, and then when you shot 4K, it was a little bit cropped in. That's gone. It now uses the whole sensor to shoot 4K, just because that down resing is easier. My least favorite thing about it, that's always a difficult question for me. It's a little tiny thing that I've bugged Panasonic about is just like the way it does custom white balance. I like all the white balance settings in here, but if you do like a custom white balance and if you're overexposed, it takes a few too many steps to expose properly, then do the white balance again. But it's just like little tiny things like that. There was a feature on the GH4 where it was kind of like turning off icons on the screen after a minute, and I didn't like that, and it made it that sometimes you'd have to push the record button twice to actually start recording because you'd have to wake it up. And I just told Panasonic that, and they said, oh, we can fix that. So they fixed it in the GH5. So I like that they've been continually adding things. In fact, there are things they're going to add in future firmware updates that I'm not even at liberty to say, but I know that people are going to be really excited because they've been asking for it. I usually dial in the Kelvin myself. I mean, there's so many options for white balance here. You have auto white balance, you have all your presets, incandescent light, shade, all that. You can even do a bunch of custom white balances, but I prefer to just dial in the Kelvin that I want. So like, but weirdly, you don't get to see it. Oh no, it's there. It's over on the side. So a lot of times I'll pick a number. Because I feel like there's never a perfect white balance. There's kind of the artistic choice that you want to make. If you want it to be warmer, a lot of times I want to make outdoor shots look a little warmer so they feel like summertime. Or like with the ice shots, I was shooting a lot of ice and I would make it a little bit bluer because I wanted it to feel pretty cold. But I do everything manual on here. I don't use aperture priority or shutter priority. I want to have control over all that. Even my focus, I use autofocus to help me, but I turn off continuous autofocus. I don't want it changing while I'm shooting. I'll just see what mode I'm in right now. Oh yeah, I can just move the focus area around, and then I can, that's with the touch screen, and then I can just push the shutter, and as soon as I push it, it turns green real fast, and then I know I'm good, and I start rolling. Yeah, I use the custom settings. The main reason I do it, it'll be interesting to see what happens when I do this. It'll probably have to reset the HDMI. If I switch to custom 1, I've saved my high frame rate, 180 frames per second mode, which is going to have a real problem with this lighting. As you can see, it's also much darker because it's a much faster shutter. But it's the quickest way for me to switch between 60 frame recording and 180. So yeah, you can come up with any settings you want in this camera, and then you have 3 custom places you can save them, and they're on the dial. I'll switch back to my normal 4K mode. Yeah, I guess I'm in 4K 60p right now. Although, because I'm here in Australia, and 60 frames per second would not jive with this lighting, I've set my shutter to 1/100th. The moment I try to do like 120 or something, yeah, you can see this flicker now. The refresh rate of the lighting is not going to jive up with that shutter speed or my frame rate. So if I just switch to 100, it goes away. Normally I would use, there's like a shutter angle mode on this camera, and I could be in 180 degrees shutter. I turn that off every time I'm in a foreign country because I probably need to dial in the shutter exactly to avoid that flicker. Or I could switch the camera. I could change the whole system frequency on the camera. You could change it to PAL if you're shooting in a PAL country. You can change it to NTSC if you're shooting in an NTSC country. What other questions do you have? No, I haven't. I like the way that natural looks right out of the box, but you can save some custom settings. Like, let's see, I never even go in here. In the menu, where is it? It must be in this one. Oh yeah, photo style. You could go in and you can change the contrast, the sharpness, noise reduction level, saturation. So you see a lot of people on the internet saying, I set my camera to 5, -1, 2, you could do that. I've always been pretty happy with the natural color profile. I find that in natural, it's just a little bit flatter than normal and a little bit less color saturation, which, because I work in news and I might interview Donald Trump and he says something interesting and we have to put it on TV right away, I can't shoot log. I need something that looks passable for television right away. So natural is pretty good, but then when I need a little bit of latitude, it's a little bit flatter and I'm able to push it. Sometimes I add a little bit more contrast, or I'll push the mid-tones color a little bit. Maybe I need to make it a little bit more yellow or a little bit more blue or something. I do that in post, yeah. And sometimes I'll mess with the color saturation just a little bit. But I'm never doing much because I like how it looks out of the camera. I've decided that my style is not to use a gimbal or a slider. I did use a jib on this latest project, but that's because many of the shots were within walking distance of my apartment. A lot of filmmakers are making beautiful, just everything is a gorgeous shot, and I've just decided my editing style is so fast, and my style of shooting, I like to be very lightweight, so I don't want to bring a big gimbal system with me. So it's not for me, but you could certainly, in fact, I think Scott has been shooting with one of those like little handheld gimbals and the GH5, which I don't know what the weight limit is on that, but it clearly works with this camera pretty well. I just shoot everything handheld, and it's a little bit dirty, but yeah, I mean, I try to be steady. I try to shoot as if I'm a tripod, like I'm not panning around. I just hold it steady. I'm okay with a little bit of movement, but the shot is generally steady, and the stabilizer gets rid of the jitter that would show up, especially when I blow it up in 4K. So I'm pretty happy with it. Well, I think that may be my time, but I'm gonna be here, so I'm happy to stick around and talk. Yeah, thank you for coming. I appreciate it, guys.